$52,000. That is what your father made last year. You know this number not because he told you. You know it because you were the one sitting at the kitchen table with his documents spread out in front of you, doing his taxes because he didn't know how. And when the number printed out on that screen, you went very still. Not because it was shocking, because 2 months earlier, you had made that same number in 60 days. He was in the next room. The television was on. Some game, some channel, something loud enough to cover the sound of whatever was happening to you in that kitchen. You didn't call him in. You didn't say a word. You just closed the laptop and stared at the wall and understood, for the first time, the full weight of what you had been quietly becoming. This is not a story about money. It never was. This is a story about what it actually cost to be the first one. Let's be honest about what the beginning looked like. Not the version you tell at dinner parties, not the cleaned up version with the charming details, the real one. You didn't grow up poor in the way movies show poor. There was no single dramatic moment, no one scene where the power goes out and everyone cries and learns something. It was quieter than that. And quieter is harder to explain. It was the specific arithmetic of your mother at a grocery store register. The way she'd go still for just a half second before the total appeared. That pause. You knew what that pause meant before you were old enough to name it. She was running the numbers. She was deciding. And sometimes the deciding meant something went back. You learned early to make that decision for her. You'd grab whatever it was, cereal, a drink, something you'd put in the cart, and you'd put it back on the shelf before she had to. You'd say you didn't want it anymore. You were 8 years old, and you were already managing someone else's dignity. That is not a normal thing for an 8-year-old to know how to do. But you didn't know it wasn't normal because it was just Tuesday. It was just how things worked. The Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances found that the bottom 50% of American households hold 2.6% of the nation's wealth. Not a quarter, not a tenth, 2.6%. Your family was inside that number. So were most of the families on your street. So was every family you knew growing up. Nobody called it anything. It was just life. Your father worked, your mother worked, not because they were lazy with ambition, but because effort was not the missing variable. The system they were inside of had rules that nobody explained to them, and nobody explained to you. You absorbed those rules, not as lessons, as gravity. Money is scarce, spending is survival, saving is a luxury, wanting more is naive. You didn't learn these things in school. You breathed them every year until they became the walls of what you believed was possible. The crack didn't come with a speech. It never does. That's the lie movies tell you, that there's a teacher with a speech or a moment with a mentor or some turning point that announces itself with music underneath it. What actually happened was smaller than that. So small you almost missed it. You were 17. You handed in a paper, you got it back with a note, not a grade, a note, that said you should think about applying to schools outside the immediate range, that you were capable of something different. That was it. No speech, no dramatic music, just a sentence from someone who saw something in you that you hadn't seen in yourself. And something shifted. Not your circumstances, your ceiling. You applied. You got a partial scholarship, $6,200 toward a school that cost nearly 5 times that. You made it work the way your family made everything work. By doing the math, by closing the gap, by figuring out the part you couldn't afford and borrowing it. The Federal Reserve's data shows the average student loan balance for first-generation college graduates sits right around $33,000 at graduation. You came in at $31,400, right on script, right on the path that no one in your family had walked before, which meant no one could tell you where the ledges were. You moved into a dorm room smaller than the bedroom you shared growing up. Your roommate had a laptop that cost more than your mother's car. You did not say that out loud. You just started watching. That's what you do when you come from where you come from. You watch. You catalog. You learn the language. Not the coursework language. You got that. The other language. The way certain people talked about money as if it were a mild inconvenience, rather than the single most load-bearing wall of every decision in your life. The way they said, "I'll just put it on the card," with zero weight in their voice. The casual ease of people for whom scarcity was theoretical. You didn't have that ease, but you studied it, the way you study something you plan to use. The $847 wasn't just a tax return. It was proof. You were in the campus library, free tax software, you'd never filed anything before. Your parents had always used someone at a strip mall who charged $90 and handed back an envelope with a check inside. You did it yourself, and when the refund number appeared, you didn't move for a while. $847. For most of your classmates, that was a weekend. That was dinner and drinks and an Uber home. For you, it was the first time a financial decision you made entirely on your own produced a positive outcome. The first time you felt like something other than a passenger. The first time you thought, I can learn this. All of it. I can learn all of it. That feeling is small, and it is everything. The double life doesn't begin with a decision. It begins with a dinner. You're home for the holidays. Someone at the table asks you a question, maybe about what you do, maybe about how things are going, and you give the safe answer, the answer that doesn't require explaining too much, the answer that makes the room go quiet in a way that takes 20 minutes to come back from. You start editing yourself. Which stories travel, which ones you fold and put away. The story about helping your dad fix an engine with used parts from a junkyard, that one plays well. It sounds like grit. It sounds like character. The story about the power getting shut off the February of 7th grade, you keep that one to yourself. You become someone who knows which version of your own life to tell, depending on which room you're standing in. And you do it so automatically for so long that one day you realize you're not even aware of doing it anymore. Meanwhile, the phone calls from home have a texture you know well. There's the reason for the call, and then there's the actual reason for the call. Sometimes it's a check-in, sometimes it's a bill that arrived on a bad week, sometimes it's your father just talking, filling the silence, and underneath the talking is a thing neither of you say. You left, and leaving, even when it's necessary, creates a space that doesn't close. You help when you can. You feel the guilt when you can't. You feel a heavier guilt when you can. Pew Research data shows that only 7% of children born in the bottom income quintile reach the top quintile as adults. 7%. You didn't know that number when you were grinding through it. You just knew you were somewhere between two worlds and fully welcome in neither. By 29, you crossed your father's annual income on a monthly basis. You have told no one. Not out of arrogance, not out of secrecy, out of the same instinct that made you put the cereal back on the shelf when you were 8. Out of the knowledge that some information protects by being withheld. That there is a version of this truth that hurts the people you love without helping them. So you open accounts and say nothing. You max contributions and say nothing. You watch compound interest begin doing what it does, quietly, invisibly, and you carry the math alone. The weight of it is not dramatic. That's the part no one tells you. The weight of being the one who crossed the line is not heavy in the way stories prepare you for. It is not grief. It is not celebration. It is a low, constant pressure, like a weather system that never fully clears. Like something you forgot you were carrying because you've been carrying it so long. The net worth crossed $47,000, then $53,000, then $71,000. Research on first-generation wealth builders suggests the psychological threshold, the first real shift in how you relate to money, comes somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000 in net worth. Not because you're rich, because for the first time, a bad month doesn't mean collapse. For the first time, you have buffer. Not comfort, buffer. 4 months of breathing room. Your parents never had 4 months. You didn't celebrate. You checked the number, you refreshed the app. You felt something adjacent to relief, the specific release of someone who has been bracing for a long time and didn't realize until the bracing stopped. Here's what nobody teaches you about being the first one. You are not building wealth. You are building the ground that wealth is built on. You are pouring concrete that will cure after you pour it, and you will never live in the house that gets built on top of it. That is the deal. That is the whole deal. But here's what happens when you understand that deal clearly instead of fighting it. You sit down with your projections one evening, real numbers, compounding at a real rate over a real timeline, and you see it. The line where what you earn stops being the primary variable, where what your money earns starts to close the gap, where the math becomes something other than grinding. And you realize, without any music, without any dramatic moment, that if nothing changes, if you just continue, your children will begin where you are now, not where you started, where you are now. That takes a moment. Your children, real ones, hypothetical ones, the idea of them, will not know the grocery store math. They will not know the pause at the register. They will not know the weight of doing your father's taxes and sitting alone with a number that rewrites how you understood your entire life. They won't know because you chose to carry it. That is the transaction. That is what all of it was for. $52,000. That is what your father made last year. You are back at that kitchen table, same table, his documents in front of you, his name on papers that represent a year of his time, his body, his mornings, his winters. But what you see in those numbers is different now. You don't see a ceiling. You see a foundation. You see a man who showed up every day inside a system that was never designed to move him forward, and he showed up anyway. Not because he believed the math would change, but because you were watching, and somewhere in that watching, you changed the math. He doesn't know what he built. He built you, and you are building something that lives in the future, in children who will never learn to put things back, in a version of your family name that carries different gravity, in the answer to a question your father never got to ask. What happens when someone decides the cycle ends here? You are what happens.